On a still and quiet night, Lieutenant Brad Thompson drove his patrol car down a lonely, deserted road, his thoughts clouded by years of deeply ingrained biases and misinformation. The isolation of the night seemed to mirror his own distorted views of the world. As he cruised along, his eyes caught sight of a black sedan parked by the side of the road. Without a second thought, he decided to investigate, unaware that the person inside was an undercover FBI agent. With practiced ease, Brad pulled up behind the sedan, flicking on the patrol car's lights, and stepped out, his hand instinctively hovering near his holster, a reflex honed by years of suspicion. Approaching the driver's side window, Brad spotted a man seated calmly behind the wheel. Marcus Johnson, the FBI agent, was dressed casually in jeans and a t-shirt, trying to appear as unassuming as possible. He drew in a deep breath, preparing for the encounter that he knew could turn unpredictable, especially given the color of his skin. Brad reached the window, his stance authoritative and rigid. He rapped on the glass with his flashlight, signaling Marcus to lower it. As the window slid down, Brad's demeanor shifted, his eyes narrowing as he assessed Marcus's appearance. "License and registration," he demanded, his voice cold and clipped. Marcus complied without hesitation, his movements measured and calm, despite the palpable tension in the air. Brad scrutinized the documents, suspicion etched on his face. "Where are you headed tonight?" he asked, his tone dripping with unspoken accusations. "I'm on my way home from work, officer," Marcus responded evenly, his voice steady. But Brad's next question revealed the bias lurking beneath his authority. "And where exactly are you from?" "You don't look like you're from around here." The atmosphere grew thicker with tension as Marcus recognized the underlying insinuation in Brad's words. He paused, gathering his composure, then responded with quiet strength. "I was born and raised in this country, officer. Is there a problem with my documentation?" Brad's jaw tightened at Marcus's firm response. The interaction was escalating, with Brad's deep-seated preconceptions clashing against Marcus's calm, dignified resistance. The tension mounted, setting the stage for a confrontation that would soon reveal the entrenched issues within the police force, challenging the perspectives of both men. Brad, increasingly agitated, leaned closer to the window, his voice dropping to a menacing tone. "Listen here. I don't appreciate your attitude. Step out of the vehicle." Sensing the growing danger, Marcus decided to take a different approach. He inhaled deeply, then spoke in a calm, measured tone. "Officer, before this goes any further, there's something I want to share with you." Brad hesitated, momentarily thrown off by the unexpected response. Marcus continued, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "When I was 10 years old, my father was pulled over for a broken taillight. What should have been a routine stop ended with him in handcuffs, face down on the pavement, because the officer thought he was reaching for a weapon when he was just getting his wallet." Marcus's story seemed to pierce through Brad's hardened exterior. His rigid posture softened slightly, though confusion and defensiveness still lingered on his face. As Marcus spoke, memories from Brad's past began to resurface. His childhood home, where racial slurs were as common as polite greetings, and his father, a respected figure in their small town, who had taught him that certain people were inherently dangerous. These memories collided with Marcus's words, creating a storm of conflicting emotions within Brad. He found himself caught between the beliefs ingrained in him since childhood and the humanity of the man standing before him. Sensing a shift in Brad's demeanor, Marcus pressed on. "Officer, I joined the FBI to work for change from within. Every day I strive to protect all citizens regardless of race, but encounters like this remind me just how far we still have to go." The mention of the FBI made Brad's eyes widen with surprise. He straightened up, suddenly feeling unsure of his footing. "FBI? You expect me to believe that?" he challenged. "It's the truth," Marcus replied calmly. "And it's also true that the role of the police is to protect and serve everyone in the community, not just some." The conversation had now shifted into a tense debate about prejudice and the responsibilities of law enforcement. Brad found himself on the defensive, his long-held beliefs under siege by Marcus's words and the reality unfolding before him. As the tension between them intensified, Brad struggled to maintain his composure, torn between his training, his upbringing, and the undeniable truth staring him in the face. Meanwhile, as the confrontation played out on that deserted road, Sarah Thompson sat anxiously at home. The clock on the wall ticked away the minutes, showing that Brad was significantly late returning from his shift. Lines of worry carved themselves into Sarah's face as she paced the living room, gripping her phone with growing urgency. For the third time that evening, she dialed Brad's number, only to be met with the cold indifference of his voicemail. Her anxiety intensified. Brad was never this unreachable, especially during a night shift. Unable to quell the gnawing fear, Sarah resolved to act. She scrolled through her contacts, pausing at a name she hadn't contacted in months. David Chun, an old lawyer friend with ties to the local police. Hesitating only briefly, she began typing. "David, I'm really worried about Brad. He's not home yet and won't answer his phone. Do you know anyone who could check on him?" As she hit send, Sarah's mind drifted to Brad's recent changes. His growing irritability, the sharp remarks that stung more than usual, and the widening gap between them. The job had always been tough, but lately, it seemed to be twisting him into someone she barely recognized. David's response was swift. "I'll make some calls. Do you know where he's patrolling tonight?" Sarah provided what little she knew, and then, her fingers trembling, she added, "David, I'm scared. Brad's not himself. The things he says about minorities, it's affecting us. I don't know what to do." Recognizing the seriousness of her message, David replied, "Sarah, I think I have someone who can help. His name is Marcus Johnson, an FBI agent focused on improving police-community relations. Let me reach out to him." What Sarah didn't know was that David immediately contacted Marcus, warning him about Brad's possible involvement in a volatile situation. He relayed Sarah's concerns about Brad's recent behavior, hinting that things might be more serious than they appeared. As Sarah waited, her heart pounded with dread, uncertain if this night would mark a turning point in her family's life, for better or worse. Meanwhile, miles away, Marcus stood firm during Brad's questioning. His phone buzzed, and with a quick glance, he read the terse message from a fellow agent. "Careful. Thompson might be tied to the corruption case. Your cover could be blown." Marcus's pulse quickened. This wasn't just a routine stop anymore. It was tangled in the very corruption he had been unraveling for months. Maintaining his composure, Marcus shifted his approach. He locked eyes with Brad and asked, "Officer Thompson, do you have children?" Startled by the unexpected question, Brad hesitated before gruffly replying, "Yeah, a son." "Why do you ask?" Marcus, steady and deliberate, continued, "What kind of world do you want for him? One where he's judged by who he is, or by the color of his skin?" For a moment, the tough facade Brad had built over the years showed signs of cracking. Images of his son's innocent face and the dreams he held for him flickered in his mind. But just as quickly, Brad fortified his defenses, recalling the expectations of his fellow officers and the persona he had honed over time. "Don't drag my family into this," Brad snapped, his hand inching toward his holster. Marcus noticed the move, his body tensing as the situation grew more precarious. He knew he had to reach Brad, to break through the hardened exterior and make him see the bigger picture. "I'm not threatening you, Officer Thompson," Marcus said carefully. "I'm asking you to think about the future, about the legacy we're leaving for the next generation." Brad's struggle was evident. He was caught between his long-held beliefs and the uncomfortable truths Marcus was presenting. The tension between them thickened, both men realizing that this encounter had transcended the bounds of a simple traffic stop. It had become a battleground for the larger issues of race and policing in America. Marcus, sensing the critical moment, made a bold decision. He locked eyes with Brad, his voice dropping to a serious tone. "Officer Thompson, what I'm about to tell you could put us both in grave danger. I'm an FBI agent, working undercover to expose a web of corruption within your department," Marcus said, his voice low and tense. Brad's eyes widened with disbelief. "You expect me to buy that? Where's your badge?" he demanded. "It's in my glove box," Marcus replied. "I can't show it to you now without blowing my cover, but I can give you names. Detective Ramirez, Sergeant Collins, Officer Martinez. Do those ring any bells?" Brad's face drained of color. These were his colleagues, people he trusted, people he'd worked alongside for years. His mind raced, trying to process the shock. "They're part of a corrupt ring," Marcus continued. "Taking bribes, planting evidence, covering up crimes for powerful people in the city. I have proof, Brad. Solid proof. Brad's world started to unravel. The police force he had defended so passionately, the institution he believed in, was now tainted by corruption at its core. A storm of emotions swirled within him. Anger, confusion, betrayal. You're lying, Brad muttered, but his words lacked conviction. I wish I were, Marcus said quietly. But deep down, you know I'm not. You've seen things, haven't you? Things that didn't quite add up, but you chose to ignore them. Memories flashed through Brad's mind. Strange absences, secretive meetings, sudden wealth among his colleagues. The pieces were falling into place, revealing an ugly truth. As Brad grappled with this revelation, a car approached in the distance, its headlights piercing the darkness. Both men turned to watch, tension thick in the air. Brad's hand hovered near his gun, torn between his loyalty to the force and the unsettling truth Marcus had laid bare. He found himself at a critical crossroads. Should he trust this man claiming to be an FBI agent, or should he stand by the brotherhood of officers he had known for so long? As the car drew closer, Brad realized he had only moments to decide where his allegiance truly lay, with the truth or with the corrupt system he had unwittingly become a part of. Just as the tension between Brad and Marcus reached its peak, Sarah's involvement brought a new layer of complexity to the drama unfolding on that deserted road. Unbeknownst to Brad, his wife Sarah had been secretly communicating with Marcus through a mutual acquaintance, David. Driven by fear for her family's future, Sarah had shared personal details with Marcus. My husband wasn't always like this, she had confided in a message. The job changed him. Now, I'm scared, not just for Brad, but for what his choices might mean for our son. I'm terrified, Mr. Johnson. What kind of example is he setting for our child? Marcus, still facing Brad, felt the weight of Sarah's words. This confrontation was no longer just about exposing corruption or convincing one man to change. It was about saving a family, breaking a cycle of prejudice that could scar future generations. With this in mind, Marcus made a crucial decision. He would try to reach Brad not just as a fellow officer, but as a father and husband. It was a risky move, one that could either defuse the situation or make it explode. Brad, Marcus said, his voice steady and sincere. I've been in contact with your wife, Sarah. She's deeply worried about you, about the path you're on and what it means for your son. Brad's face twisted with a mix of anger and disbelief. You stay away from my family, he shouted, his hand now firmly gripping his holster. But Marcus stood his ground. She reached out because she cares, Brad. She sees what this job, these beliefs are doing to you and your family. Is this really the legacy you want to leave for your son? Brad's resolve began to crack. The mention of his son pierced through his defenses, forcing him to confront the consequences of his actions and beliefs. As Brad wrestled with this inner turmoil, Marcus knew he was treading a fine line. One wrong word could shatter this fragile moment of vulnerability, sending everything spiraling out of control. But if he could appeal to Brad's love for his family, there was still hope. The choice was clear. Brad had to decide between the comfort of his old prejudices and the difficult path of reevaluating his beliefs, for the sake of his family and his own integrity as a police officer. The tension between Brad and Marcus was nearly unbearable as the sound of a police siren grew louder, signaling the approach of more officers. Brad's face twisted with emotions, torn between his loyalty to the force and the disturbing truths Marcus had laid bare. That's probably my backup, Brad muttered, his voice tight with anxiety. You better have a solid explanation ready. Marcus's expression turned steely. Brad, listen closely. The officers in that car are likely involved in the corruption I've been uncovering. If they recognize me, we're both in serious danger. Brad's hand hovered near his holster, trembling as his eyes darted between Marcus and the advancing headlights. How can I trust you? He asked, his voice laced with doubt. You don't need to trust me, Marcus replied urgently. Trust your gut. Think about all the things that haven't made sense, the inconsistencies you've noticed. You know something's wrong in your department. The police car rolled to a stop behind Brad's cruiser, its headlights casting an unforgiving glare. Two officers stepped out, their faces hidden in the blinding light. Everything all right here, Thompson? One of them called, his hand resting with deceptive casualness on his weapon. Brad recognized the voice instantly. Officer Ramirez, one of the names Marcus had warned him about. His mind raced, recalling instances when Ramirez's behavior had been suspicious, when evidence had inexplicably vanished after Ramirez had access to it. Marcus tensed beside him, ready for whatever might happen next, his eyes locking onto Brad's in a silent plea for him to choose wisely. For a split second, Brad stood paralyzed, torn between his allegiance to his fellow officers and the unsettling truth Marcus had presented. A truth that offered a future free from the corruption he was beginning to see clearly. As Ramirez and his partner drew nearer, Brad understood that he had only moments to decide. His choice now would not only shape the rest of the night, but would also define who he was as a man and a police officer. The danger was no longer just physical, it was a test of his moral compass. Taking a deep breath, Brad turned to face the approaching officers, his decision made. As they got closer, he positioned himself protectively between Marcus and the two officers, raising a hand to stop them. "Hold up, Ramirez!" Brad called out, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions within him. "I've got this under control." Ramirez hesitated, a flash of suspicion crossing his face. "You sure, Thompson? Looked like you were having some trouble from where we were sitting." Forcing a calm he didn't feel, Brad nodded. "Just a routine stop. No need for backup." Marcus remained silent, fully aware that even the slightest mistake could shatter the fragile peace of the moment. Ramirez's partner, a newer officer named Jenkins, shifted uneasily. "We got a call about a suspicious vehicle in the area. That wouldn't happen to be this one, would it?" Brad's mind raced. He knew no such call had been made. This was a pretext, a ruse to disrupt Marcus's investigation. In that instant, all the small irregularities Brad had ignored over the years coalesced into a clear image of corruption. "No," Brad replied firmly, surprising even himself with the strength in his voice. "This isn't the vehicle you're looking for. In fact, I think you two should head back to the station. I've got some paperwork to file about certain irregularities I've noticed recently." The atmosphere grew even more tense as Ramirez's hand edged closer to his weapon. "What kind of irregularities are we talking about, Thompson?" Brad stood his ground, his decision solidifying with each passing second. "The kind the FBI might find interesting, Ramirez. The kind that could take down half the department if they were exposed." The tension was thick enough to cut as Ramirez and Jenkins exchanged uneasy glances. For a moment, it seemed the situation might erupt into violence. But then, to Brad's surprise, Ramirez stepped back. "All right, Thompson, have it your way. But remember, we're all family here. You wouldn't want to do anything to jeopardize that, would you?" The threat in Ramirez's words was unmistakable, but Brad held firm, unflinching in his resolve. As the two officers drove off, leaving him alone with Marcus once more, Brad watched their taillights fade into the night. His face was a mix of determination and fear as he turned to Marcus. "I hope you're right about this," he murmured, "because I think I just started a war." The gravity of Brad's choice hit them both immediately. They had to act fast. Ramirez and Jenkins wouldn't waste time before alerting their corrupt allies, putting Brad and Marcus in immediate peril. "We need to move now," Marcus urged, his voice tense. "My car's set up with surveillance gear. We can head to a safe house." Brad's instincts as a cop kicked in, his training guiding him through the surreal situation. "What about Sarah?" he asked, his voice tight with worry. "She could be in danger too." Marcus nodded, already on it. "I'll contact my team. They'll make sure she's protected." They sped away from the scene, Brad's phone buzzing incessantly with messages from his fellow officers. Ignoring them, he kept his focus on the road ahead and the daunting task that lay before them. When they reached a plain apartment on the outskirts of town, Sarah was waiting inside, her face etched with worry. She rushed to Brad, relief mingling with fear in her eyes. "I was so scared when David told me what was going on," she whispered, holding him tight. Brad returned her embrace, the weight of his decisions sinking in. "I'm sorry, Sarah, for everything, but we're going to fix this." Marcus gently interrupted their moment. "We don't have much time. We need to gather all the evidence and get ready to present it to the FBI." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Brad shared everything he knew about the corrupt officers in his department, while Marcus backed up the information with his own findings. Sarah proved indispensable. her sharp eye for detail helping to weave together what initially seemed like random events into a compelling narrative of corruption. As dawn broke, they had finally compiled a comprehensive dossier ready for the FBI. But just as they were about to leave, the screech of tires outside shattered the morning calm. Marcus peeked through the blinds. "They've found us," he said quietly. Outside, several police cars had surrounded the building, with Ramirez and Jenkins leading a group of armed officers toward the entrance. Brad, Marcus, and Sarah exchanged tense glances, understanding the severity of the situation. They had enough evidence to expose the corruption, but first they had to survive this final confrontation. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed up the stairwell, and they steeled themselves for the fight of their lives. The day of the evidence presentation arrived with tension so thick it was palpable. Outside the FBI headquarters, Brad, Marcus, and Sarah were keenly aware of the risks they were taking. As they approached the entrance, they were intercepted by a group of corrupt officers, Ramirez and Jenkins at the forefront. "Think carefully about what you're doing, Thompson," Ramirez growled, his hand hovering near his weapon. "There's still time to back out, to pretend this never happened." Brad held his ground, his resolve bolstered by Sarah's presence beside him. "It's over, Ramirez. We're doing this." Just as the situation threatened to escalate, Sarah stepped forward, her voice steady but commanding. "Before anyone does something stupid, you should know that I've got everything recorded." She pulled out her phone and played a video that captured not only the confrontation from the night of the traffic stop, but also incriminating conversations between the corrupt officers. Ramirez's face drained of color as he realized how damning the evidence was. Seizing the moment of confusion, Marcus signaled to a team of FBI agents who had been lying in wait. They quickly moved in, securing the corrupt officers before they could react. Inside the FBI building, Brad took a deep breath and began presenting the evidence. His testimony, combined with Marcus's investigation and Sarah's recordings, painted a devastating picture of systemic corruption within the police force. As Brad spoke, he felt a burden lift from his shoulders. He was no longer just a part of the corrupt system. He was now an agent of change, fighting to restore integrity to the institution he had once protected without question. The presentation ended with a shocking revelation. The corruption extended far beyond the local police department, implicating high-ranking officials and city government. In the aftermath, Brad faced both consequences and redemption. He received commendation for his bravery in exposing the corruption, but also accepted a suspension for his past actions and complicity. He committed himself to retraining in community outreach, determined to become the officer he should have always been. Marcus, recognized for his persistence and skill, earned a promotion within the FBI, and continued his work on improving police-community relations, using the case as a powerful example of the need for vigilance and reform. Sarah, proud of her husband's transformation, became an advocate for police reform, working with community organizations to bridge the gap between law enforcement and marginalized communities. As they left the FBI building that day, Brad, Sarah, and Marcus knew their actions had sparked changes that would ripple through the entire criminal justice system. It was only the beginning of a long journey toward true justice and equality, but they were ready to face the challenge.